let's just break down the, if you like, the four principal actors: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, that the National Cyber Security Center seems to talk about. So Russia is trying to have hybrid warfare effect. So it's trying to cause operational failure, yeah, and to cause loss of confidence and loss of morale and loss of confidence. In the case of Ukraine, we saw a massive set, and we continue to see, not always successful, a massive set of DDoS attacks from Killnet, who seem to be kind of the lead Russian body doing this. And these were application layer attacks, very focused, and they've hit critical infrastructure in this country and in other NATO countries, but not at the scale they did it in Ukraine. And they are using botnets and AI-driven traffic manipulation to really maximise the effect they're able to have. And frankly, they're learning as they go. So they're not just repeating the same attacks, but that bottom locker I talked about, they're learning and changing that as they go. And digital government service, financial services, emergency response systems are kind of classic target set for them. They want to have societal effect. And, you know, for instance, the attack on NHS systems in 2022 here, and some API attacks in 2023, again, in the same kind of target set. China are doing what is classically called adaptive and targeted DDoS. Okay, so they're doing traffic manipulation and they're reflection attacks, and they're doing code insertion wherever they can. Yeah, and it's really, really noticeable that there is an aspiration in the Chinese system which mirrors that you would get from the National Security Agency or GCHQ, not just to think of immediate effect, but to think of how in the medium and long term we're going to be positioned, postured, have access, and be able to act in the way that our political masters direct. Yeah, so very consistently, Chinese like to leave behind added value, as my friends at GCHQ used to call it, on every occasion they get anywhere in a network. So that a Chinese DDoS attack is a really interesting challenge. And there's that great thing called the Great Cannon. I mean, the Chinese are great at names, really. You know, it's just fantastic. Anyway, the Great Cannon, which injects malicious scripts into internet traffic to redirect large-scale attacks. So it's quite sophisticated compared to, let's say, the Russian or the other attacks I'm going to talk about. We could talk some more about China. About 5 or 6 times a year, I find myself working for a commercial client who these are major corporations who come to me and they're subject to a significant APT attack for a state purpose. So they're not ransomware groups and the rest trying to make some money, but they're actually subject to an attack because they have IP, because there's pursuit of a particular individual and intelligence needs to be gathered by the hostile state or whatever it is. And this is classic Chinese kind of behavior. So North Korea, we're all familiar with the Lazarus Group. They've been made very public. And North Korea are a classic, let's see if we can distract you while we steal some data or the ability to take some money over here. And that kind of DDoS as distractor, as well as RDoS attacks if they can, is just classic North Korea and pretty straightforward. But they don't stop and they learn as they go. And then Iran's really interesting because Iran is in one of those conflicts. Iran is toe-to-toe with Israel and the West, but with Israel really, and has been. Anyone who says, Iran and Israel aren't at war, the answer is they are, just in cyberspace, at sea, and, as we've seen through the proxy groups. Yeah, and they're absolutely focused on CNI and on heavy-duty CNI, so the energy sector, and the communications and the transport sector. And it's really striking what you see in the Gulf states and with Israel in terms of the techniques that Iran use. And they're using kind of multi-vector DDoS attacks, trying to create kind of infrastructure disruption and demonstrate effect. And of course, we've seen them over the years. And they've learned, haven't they? Because 13, 14 years ago, in response to sanctions, they had to go with large DDoS attacks at American banks, which in part drove the market that is represented here today, I'd note, the market of services represented in this room, driven in part by that nature of DDoS attack then. But since then, they've learned that kind of thing just doesn't work, and they're a bit bored of losing. So they're becoming more effective and sophisticated in what they do. So if I had to draw out what are the themes to look at today, I think AI-driven attacks are at the cutting edge of it and need more thought. And we aren't yet at the stage of agentic DDoS attack. I don't think. I mean, you guys tell me if you've seen it, but I don't think we are. That certainly isn't what people are talking about. You need evidence that was the case. But that can't be very far away, given the agentic revolution that's going on across the industry, which we're seeing and which you hear from Silicon Valley. Multi-vector campaigns, so unless you've got every single attack vector covered and know what you do on it, you probably aren't covered. And you need to optimize that. And you also, when you're talking about targeted API and application, but particularly targeted API, you're heavily dependent upon what's behind your interface with the provider that's then rendering to you the data. So that's really interesting. And I wonder the point at which that will become a question that DORA regulators will ask, because that must be a question you ask. Once we see a disruption of that kind, they'll come and ask that question. Anyway, that's me. I look forward to talking in the break, and I hope I've given you a sufficient overview of the world within which we're operating, which we need to have in mind when we calculate our risk.